Hello everyone, my name is Tanveet Gill. I'm a solutions architect here at Meroxa. In this video, we will be going over a transformation process using Meroxa and Turbine in JavaScript. If you're unfamiliar with Meroxa, Meroxa is a real-time stream processing application platform as a service. It allows you to build applications in any language that you're familiar with to work with your data. So Meroxa can help you ingest, orchestrate, transform, and stream data to and from anywhere using languages you already know, such as JavaScript, Python, Golang, and Ruby. We also have support for other languages coming, such as Java, C#, and many more in the future. So for this tutorial, this is a multi-part video tutorial series where we will be taking a database for a hypothetical e-commerce store and transforming that data and writing it to multiple destinations. So Meroxa has support for many integrations. We allow you to move data from any source to any destination, whether that's a SQL database or an AWS hosted database, or even a messaging service like Kafka. If you head over to our integrations page on our website, you can see all the popular sources that we support along with all the destinations. If there's a source or destination that you would like us to support or are curious about, you can always email us and let us know, since we do have the ability to connect from any source to any destination. So in today's tutorial, we will be moving data from Postgres to Snowflake. During the migration of the data, we will use the Google Maps API here to enrich our customer address data. So every time a record is created in our applications and is written to our source database, so in this case Postgres, Meroxa will stream process that data over to Snowflake, and while it's stream processing it, it will run a function over each record that comes in. In our case, for this video, we will be using the Google Maps API to enrich the address data portion of that record and then send that over to Snowflake. To get started, you will need to install the Meroxa CLI and have a Meroxa account set up. You can head over here at docs.meroxa.com and click Get Started to find the steps to set up your account and install the Meroxa CLI. You will also need Git to manage version control for your application. Once you have the Meroxa CLI installed and a Meroxa account set up, you can just do Meroxa login in your terminal, which will authenticate you, and then we will initialize a Meroxa application. So to do that, you would do Meroxa apps initialize, or init, the name of your application, we'll call it test in this case, and the language you want to use. So we will use JavaScript, so I will give it JS, and this will initialize some boilerplate code for you to start working with. Once the app's initialized, you can open it up with your preferred IDE. So I will use Visual Studio Code in this case. And here we can see our index.js file. Here we have some sample code that kind of gives you an overview of how things work. As you can see, this is very similar to a web application. You have your main index.js file. You can have your modules here in your package.json, and we also have testing here, so you can use any testing framework that you are already familiar with. So diving a little bit more into our index.js file, here is where we will write most of our code. You can see here we have a turbine.resources function. This is where we would define our data source. In this case, it will be Postgres, which I have named as PGDB. We'll go into later how we add these data sources and destinations in just a moment. Off of PGDB, we want to read a table, so we will give the provide the table name that we want to read. In our case, it is the customers table. Later, if we're doing any processing, we can run a function on every single record that comes in from this source DB. In this case, we're running this anonymized function. Later, we'll change this function to use the Google Maps API and get the address off the record and actually enrich that data using the Google Maps API. For our destination, we will use Snowflake, and Meroxa will automatically know to create a table in Snowflake if there isn't one. So in this case, we'll call it customers address enriched. Now that we have defined in our stream processing application what source to read off of, in this case PGDB, and which destination to write to, in this case Snowflake, we actually need to add these resources to Meroxa so Meroxa knows how to connect to them. If you log in, we have a few ways to connect to these resources. In this case, you can do it via the dashboard. So you can click Add Resource, select your source database first, in this case Postgres, give it a name, pg_db, and provide the connection URL. For Snowflake, we do something similar, give it a name, and provide the connection URL along with some other credentials that we require for Snowflake. To see how to set up your resources, you can head over to the docs. We have a detailed guide on how to add your Postgres database along with Snowflake. For Snowflake, we also have a YouTube video on our YouTube, which I will link in the description below, which you can follow along to quickly set up your Snowflake database. Once you've added your resources, you can see all your resources in the Meroxa dashboard along with the status of them. You can also see this in the command line by typing in Meroxa resources list, and you can see the state of all the resources and if they're ready. For our case, for our data application, we care about the Postgres resource, and we can see that it is ready and connected, and the Snowflake resource, which is also ready. So now that our resources are set up, we can actually focus on the important stuff, such as building our application. I've added some code here that loops over every single record that is coming in real time to the Meroxa stream process. And on every single record, we are getting the address field. Using this address field, we are passing it into this function called Google Maps Lookup. This Google Maps Lookup function will return us an object, an API response from the Google Maps API. If you're unfamiliar with the Google Maps API, I've added some documentation on how you can get started with that in the description below. Once we get a response from the Google Maps API, we format that response using this generate address object function, and then using that data, we set a new field on our record called address metadata, and we write the address metadata, which has a type of this. You can see just off of one address, and using a third-party API, we can get some metadata on that address, such as the city, region, state, country, postal code, and some geometry around latitude and longitude. You can also see that I've added a new file called the Google Maps API. In this file, we're just making an async JavaScript API call to the Google Maps API. We're using the geocode API here and passing in that address. After that, we are using this generate address object function, which does a series of checks to see if the data is valid, and then returns us this metadata object, which we write for every single record. I've also added an environment variable here that just stores the Google Maps API key. So once all of that is done, we can actually test this locally first and then deploy the application once we're happy with what we have. So for testing, Meroxa allows developers to quickly build, test, and iterate their code on sample data. Under the fixtures folder, we provide a schema representation of your database, and you can modify this to match your database so you can quickly test locally before deploying an application live. Here we have our customers table, and we have one record in it. Under the value field, you see we have the schema, the payload, and some details about the source resource we're using. In our record, we can see we have a address field that has 1 Letterman Drive, San Francisco as its address. To test locally, what we could do is we just use Meroxa apps run, and this will use that fixtures file to run. So after running the test locally, you can see that the record was modified, and this is what we're writing to our Snowflake resource. Here we took our address, 1 Letterman Drive, San Francisco. From Google Maps, we got this address metadata field, and we are writing all those fields we talked about earlier to Snowflake with our address enriched. One thing to point out about the fixtures file, Meroxa in your app.json, Meroxa knows how to read this file. Let me just format this. It knows to look for fixtures that you have defined here under your resources in the app.json configuration. Fixtures are really powerful because they provide a JSON representation of our data, and since every developer is familiar with JSON, they can quickly and easily work with this schema, and Meroxa knows how to read data from any resource and then write it and transform it to the destination, what the destination expects. Now that we are happy with our application, we just need to commit our changes and deploy the application. Once deployed, the app will read data from our Postgres database, specifically the customers table. The data will come in a JSON represented form that looks like our fixtures, and then we will call the Google Maps API on the address field, and once we get a response from Google Maps, we will generate this object, which we will write back to the record, and then the records will be returned, all modified and enriched, and those records will be written to our Snowflake destination. So to deploy the application, we will commit our changes first. So add all the files and do a commit. Once our changes are committed, we just use the command Meroxa apps deploy, and then we will deploy our application live. So this can take a few minutes to deploy, and once it is deployed, it will run through all the records that are currently in our database and run them through our process here, our anonymize function, and any new records, whether that's a create, update, or delete that happens in Postgres, that will also run through this stream process. Now that our stream processing application has been deployed, we can head over to the dashboard to see what it looks like. Clicking under the apps, we can see that we have our test application that we just deployed with using the Snowflake and Postgres resources. Clicking into it, we can find some more metadata on the application and what exactly is going on. So here we're reading from Postgres and running the transform function and writing to Snowflake. Another way you can see what's going on is via the command line by typing in Meroxa apps list to list all of our applications. Here we have the test application running. Here we could do Meroxa apps logs and provide the name of the application to see what's going on. As you can see here, we had some debug statements in our code. So we grabbed the address, and then we got the Google lookup response, and we generated this address metadata object. Inside our Postgres database, we can list out our tables. So we have the customers table here. If we run a select query on this table, we will see that we have our table here with our address field right here. On the Snowflake side, running the select all command on our customer address enriched table that we generated, we can see we get our row back, and in the record content column we can see the enriched data here. So this is the data that we got from the Google Maps API, and we have the original data from the payload as well. To showcase how Meroxa works in real time, we can insert a record to our Postgres database in the customers table. So if we select all from customers, we should have 2 rows. Here we can see we have 2 rows. I just inserted the same row from above. After the application is running, we will go over to Snowflake. We know that the application is running, so it will run through the series and do the transformation, and then write that data to Snowflake with the enriched data. So doing this in a few moments, we have our second record here with the same enriched data. And that's it. So our application is running. Every new record that will be coming into our database will run through the series of steps and get processed. Next week, we will be doing another video series along with a blog post, along with the code, which can be found on GitHub, which will take the phone numbers on our customer table, and it will run through the Telnix API to get some metadata on the phone number to determine whether it is a mobile or a landline or a voice over IP phone number. And then we will call the Twilio API to trigger a text message if the phone is a mobile phone number. Later, we will write that data to MongoDB to demonstrate that. If you have any questions or inquiries on how you can get started with Meroxa, feel free to leave a comment. You can also join our Discord community, which is found on the website under Follow Us, and someone will be more than happy to help you. Thank you for watching, and it's been a pleasure.